this question, what are the potential consequences in regards to the labour market? If you could keep your answers short, and can you talk about labour market in the UK and then labour market in Europe? Guy.
Yeah, I'm going to be very brief. I wrote a book called The Precariat just before the referendum and before the election of Donald Trump. And I said a large part of the precariat of less educated part will be voting for Brexit and will be voting for Trump. And I think we've got to be, as Europeans, looking in the mirror at this issue, because we shouldn't divorce what's happening in Britain from a fact that there's a crisis in Europe as well. The crisis of insecurity, the growth of the precariat. I get invited to every single country in the European Union to talk to precariat groups, and they're all very angry. The Gilets jaunes in France is just the latest symptom of a fundamentally festering inequality, insecurity, stressful set of circumstances. And we've got to be self-critical, because the European Union has also failed to address the growth of these phenomena. And I think that part of it is much to do with the labour market, but it's much more to do with what I call rentier capitalism. More and more the returns to economic growth go to the plutocracy and to plutocratic corporations. More subsidies from governments are going to those corporations. More austerity cuts for living standards and benefits are intensifying this insecurity. And if we continue to go down this course, we will move from a situation that today 1 in 4 voters across the European Union is voting for a populist party or populist politician to a point where half will be doing so. And that, of course, will spell political dangers that we don't need to elaborate, because we've been there before. We're seeing what Trump represents. And I happen to be an economic advisor to one of the opposition leaders in Britain. And I said, I wish you could come out and say, Keynes' famous remark. Keynes was asked, why have you changed your mind? Why are you being inconsistent on this issue? And he said, sir, when the facts change, I change my mind. What do you do, sir? And I think we've got in Trump a fundamental shift in the geopolitical situation where Europe has to address its own problems and challenges and forge a new identity in the context of an emerging China and a fundamentally different United States with its America first and all the other stuff that goes with it. So I think it is something to do with the labour market, but it's much more to do with the breakdown of our income distribution system, where disproportionately large amounts of wealth and income are going to a tiny plutocracy and an elite. And those people are represented here in Davos. And the precariat, the group that I'm writing about and talking to, are not represented here in Davos. So I think that we do have a fundamental challenge, and it's not just to do with the labour market.
Jules, your thoughts on what this Brexit process, whatever it looks like, means for the labour market in the UK and in Europe?
I think it is very difficult to answer, and of course this is such a critical question where we really don't know what's going to happen. But I think the things that, from trying to balance political and economic arguments that have come out, certainly on the UK side of things, I think the one thing that has come in quite clearly has been the issue around not skills-based movement, but just free movement. So I do think it is quite likely that the UK will adopt a skills-based system. That's what all the kind of white paper and advisory has been talking about. But again, I think that Europe as a continent, it will be far more hit by automation, by the need for reskilling, the digital economy, the changes in the way that we work and travel anyway, that I think that this is something that the agenda is moving on so quickly that it's something that we need to pool our brain power. So I know that's slightly avoiding the question, but I think it's very hard to predict, and it's not just about the arguments that we're having at the moment. I think there are arguments we haven't even thought of, but that the digital economy will dictate.
Martin, something that Guy mentioned earlier was that, James Dyson's moving to Singapore. James Dyson's argument for going there is to find the right skills for his company and what he does. He says it's not about Brexit, not about tax. But there is this discussion about skills, where they are and how the system's working, education and everything else, that Europe is lagging behind the likes of Asia, the US.
I can't obviously comment on Mr. Dyson's business affairs, and I wouldn't dream of doing so. But I think the points have already brought up. The most obvious change that one can expect if we leave, and if we have a government anything like the present one, both of which I think are open to question, is that immigration policy will change. The instinct of this government will be to try and reduce numbers very substantially. It will fail. I think that's about as predictable as anything. I can go with the reasons why, but it will certainly make life difficult. And again, it's perfectly clear that it will try to pursue a policy which is trying to deal with that very problem, which is oriented towards taking in skilled labour as they define it, which at the moment they seem to be defining by how much they're going to be paid. I understand the last one was 30,000 a year. Somebody can correct me. So if you're going to earn more than £30,000 a year, you can come and if not, you can't. That removes an awful lot of people who are very important to us, like pretty well all our nurses and pretty important. So that you can see the screams already, hear the screams already. So that will be our effect. Now, what will it mean? That will, of course, be a mess, because all our immigration systems are a mess, and changing them will make that is certain. They will be under the Home Office, which is by a long way our worst department. Now, I think that's a non-controversial statement in Britain.
The worst.
Well, but then on the European side, obviously, export of labour, there's been a very significant emigration to the UK. A lot of talented, wonderful people have come. I think the costs to Europe will be real, though not massive, because most of the people who would like to come have come. I mean, say the huge Polish immigration has happened, and clearly there will be lots of people leaving for very good reasons in this situation. But I do think finally there are a lot of firms, and I've been in contact with very different groups from guys, for which the flexibility of moving labour around, and I'm talking skilled, medium-skilled people around Europe, is a very important part of their business operation. And if they're going to have to do with the Home Office on every one of those things, it's going to be a bloody nightmare. And basically, they're going to run Britain as a completely separate island from the rest of the European business, because they're going to have to, and that will be one of the many ways in which this will be costly.
I have talked to a lot of company CEOs about lots of things to do with this, but 2 or 3 have said to me who run businesses in Britain who employ a lot of European workers, that actually what they'll do is they've already got their bases lined up.
They'll move them there, yeah, of course.
In other, Amsterdam, other parts of Europe, they've already got their sort of ducks in a row. We're almost out of time, but I just want to, a lot of people have liked this question, and it's the top of my list here, so I'm going to put it to you guys for a quick response. What is the best argument against a new referendum? Guy?
Further uncertainty, but I still think that it's the least bad option from where we are today.
To have one.
To have a second vote. I think a lot of the young precariat didn't turn out last time. We only had a 70% turnout. And a lot of the younger people are tending to be much stronger Remain. They see themselves as European. And I think that having a second vote will be divisive, but any option is going to be divisive. And I think this will be the least bad of the options available. And we should enter that debate by saying that we should be critical Remainers. None of us should be idolising
Well, the UK's always been that, hasn't it?
Yeah, but
don't worry about that,
to a
guys.
European audience, or predominantly European audience. I think one of the lessons of Brexit should be the lessons for all of us. I live and work in Europe, so I think we all have lessons to learn. It may take different forms, the the Gilets jaunes is a different form to what's happened in Britain, and what's happening in Eastern Europe is different from Western Europe. But the same phenomena have to be addressed.
Jules.
I think the argument against is that even if a result came out and effectively for Remain, it probably wouldn't do so in a hugely conclusive way. It's not going to suddenly be an 80-20 split. It's likely to still be very close, and looking at the different polls, it's still very close. It does look like it's slightly shifted, but it's very close. And the reason I think that could be very disruptive and divisive is I kind of draw parallels a little bit with any of the rest of you heard Sir David Attenborough talking about why isn't more done more quickly on climate change. And he said, as humans, when we listen to things that are just of such complexity and enormity and very often put in a negative way, we naturally tune out. And I think a lot of people have tuned out because it's just so complex. And as I say, a lot of the discussion around it has been quite negative. So I think that would be an argument against.
So, little advertisement. This is the subject of my column, which will be up in about an hour. Well, the case for and against the next referendum. I think it's basically been described that it won't resolve the uncertainty because it won't decide Britain's position, and that it will turn what is still manageable and civilized civil war, it is a civil war, into an unmanageable and very uncivilized civil war, in which if the Brexiters lose, but by a modest margin, a very, very significant proportion of the British population will feel, with some good reason, that they have not been listened to, that they've been cheated of their democratic right to make a decision, and that therefore the legitimacy of the political system as a whole, of which they are part, which is, I would say, the single most important asset Britain as a country has had historically, and the thing that is striking about Britain compared with other large European countries, that asset will be destroyed. Unfortunately, in my view, that asset is going to be destroyed anyway. I remain, to be precise, because this is so important, I'm going to say it. I got my paper and myself support as the first best option, if it can be done without risk, the Prime Minister's wretched deal for this reason. People disagree with me, but for this reason. If the Brexiters won't let that through, I am never going to accept a no-deal crash out, and we'll have another referendum. But then the civil war has already got really serious. The irresponsibility of the Brexiters in the last month in not accepting victory and compromise is making a political resolution in Britain almost impossible. And that is, to me, absolutely astonishing.
And depressing.
Of course.
And we are pretty much out of time. As you can tell, it's an extremely complicated and difficult issue to try and navigate and try and resolve. So many problems come up as you try and discuss even the basic issues. Thank you so much for your questions. This was a very short session, so apologies we couldn't cover more of your questions, but you can continue the conversation. If you do that, you use hashtag WEF19, hashtag Brexit on social media.
Sally, can I?
Yes, sorry,
I
Jules.
feel like it's ended on such a negative note. Can I just put in a very short anecdote?
Go on.
A few years ago, I was a British ambassador, and I collaborated with my European colleagues in such a strong way, not because our capitals instructed us to or the Commission instructed us to, but because there were so many things on which we agreed. We had shared priorities, shared interests, shared values. And I think let's not forget as we go forward. I'm not meaning to belittle the complexity, the fragility, but let's not forget what we represent as a continent, as a group of people who share values. Because, as I say, there are so many other things beyond our continent that are so important. And I think it's really important to remember that.
And that's why Jules is a young global leader and an optimist. Thank you all for being on the panel. Jules Chappell.